it's come out and started to go up. I think if you look at the history, we're still in the early phases as far as I see it.
So do you see them broadening their scope associated with their social media initiatives and activities, or working on deepening them? So more engagement, more influence within the communities that they're already established within?
I think it's both. It's, they've got to broaden because not everybody here or everyone here may be on Facebook, but not everybody here may be open to getting poked by someone they don't know, right? There are the opt-outs and the security functions that are along the way. So they may have a presence on Facebook, but they also may say, in our world, well, we need to be on Twitter, right? We need to have somebody out there that owns getting information out about the company, and again, not just about recruitment, but about business. And you look at, I think Comcast gets a lot of accolades for what they're doing out in the customer service world. Someone tweets Comcast, blah, blah, blah. Someone's on top of that instantaneously. Right. And that may be, someone in the room says, Tim Stanton just mentioned Comcast in a panel. Somebody at Comcast is watching that, and they're responding to that. And they say, oh, what's this panel, right? And so they go and they look at your hashtag and say, okay, let me follow this and see what's going on. So it's definitely both. Again, they haven't really, no one's mastered it, right? I don't think anybody organizationally has mastered the plan to say this is the right way to do it. You have organizations like Ernst & Young who've gone all in with what they're doing with Facebook from a college recruitment perspective. But are they doing that organizationally for Ernst & Young from a business standpoint outside of recruitment? And so the question comes, I don't think they've mastered it yet. I don't think anybody has.
Thanks, Tim. Gene, sort of State of the Union?
From a legal standpoint, and this is a perfect segue, it's increased awareness. Companies prove day in and day out that they're a little bit slow. Plus, they tend to do things like want to control. Well, you can do a lot of things with social media. Control isn't one of them. They can try to influence. They can frame behavior for employees, for consumers, for would-be consumers. But trying to grapple and control is a losing battle. And in terms of increased awareness, we'll see a lot of legal developments, and the ones that will be most notable will be the mistakes. There'll be the employers, the companies that simply want to stay out of social media. And I guess because we're in the Winter Olympics, I'll massacre a quote from one of the IOC executives. If we're not talking together, you're talking about me in social media. And slowly, ever so slowly, so many companies are coming to that realization, as opposed to the IBMs and that sort, where they invite it, they encourage it, but they come out with a social computing policy that sets frameworks, sets expectations and from their employees and from the people who are dealing in social media in every strata. So you'll see the mistakes, but the social media lawyers, most of us are proceeding from a very common sense standpoint, and that is, it's another way of communicating, and the more you know about it, the more you can be thoughtful about it, the more you can take steps that enable you to get your good messages out, to respond when there are forest fires of bad information, dominoes and things like that, and practicing prevention. Because what you'll see is the lawsuits you'll see will be companies that simply, and employees who simply had no policy, had no pre-thought, and that's why you get the scare stories you do.
No, and we've gone over plenty of those from a case study perspective within the class. Sean, I'm always interested to hear what you have to say. You definitely take a holistic view of the market, and you always come up with some interesting issues and trends. So what do you think about social media in 2010?
Yeah, I think that the really interesting aspect about social media at this point is that it's increasingly becoming more real-time. So I'm less interested in a Facebook update versus a Twitter update, and I'm just more interested in the fact that technology is allowing us to communicate in real time more and more. And the tools that are really interesting to me are the tools that are kind of pushing that. So I think Twitter was really interesting 2 years ago when we all were at this festival in Austin and realized that it was kind of neat to update and find people at parties, right? But I think that if you think about what's kind of interesting right now, And then the interesting implications of that, I think it's things like Foursquare, where you're checking into a location and you're saying where you are, and they're sort of adding richer semantics to the real-time web. Or actually, the company that I was kind of most interested in, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens as they roll back in to Google now, but a bunch of Google engineers started a company called Aardvark, and Google just basically bought them, which was kind of an interesting play. I think this is the new model, by the way, for all of you. Go to Google, work there for a couple of years, go start a company, work there for a couple of years, hire a bunch of your friends from Google, and then get acquired by Google. It's a wonderful way to become wealthy. It's sort of the new Google stock options.
It's what 20 years ago it was GE.
Yeah.
Now it's Google.
So,
and don't forget your professor to put on.
but if you look at Aardvark, right, it was this amazing social network, but really just tapped into a bunch of social networks where you could ask a question, and then it would route that question to the right person and take advantage of the fact that between our iPhones, Twitter, instant message, Facebook, it would get a hold of you quickly to get an answer. And like, there's wonderful stories of people asking questions from like, where's the best place to get a pizza on Craig Street, to like, what is the best way to make balloon animals for my nieces and nephews that are in town this weekend and I've never been around children before, right? And it's sort of route to the right person. There's a lot of artificial intelligence behind it. But it was a really interesting example of adding context to this larger trend of the real-time web. So, you know, I think it's funny and fun to watch Twitter argue about 50 million status updates a day now, and are they bigger than MySpace and things like that. And certainly for a company that's taken investment with north of $1 billion valuation, that's an important conversation for them to have. But more for all of us, I think the better question is like, forget for a moment which tool you use. Let's just talk about the fact that the web is increasingly becoming real time. And then just to circle back to some sort of privacy implications of it, how many of you saw last week the site that launched Please Rob Me? Did everybody see this? Yeah, so this is brilliant, right? There's this site called Please Rob Me. And what it is it's taking advantage of everybody checking in on Foursquare, twittering their location, and it's saying like, hey, you know, so if I say, oh, I just...
Cars unlocked.
Yeah, exactly. I just went and checked in at the Heinz School. Oh, well, my house on Walnut Street is now open for anybody who wants to come pick up a new TV. But I think it's... I gotta go, Eric. But I think it's a really interesting example of sort of some of the privacy implications here. So.
And who started that? Was that Rob?
It was a couple engineers. I don't know, like 3 engineers did it. I think more just to illustrate some of the privacy implications here. But it's a really interesting site and has gotten a lot of buzz as people sort of wrestle with what does this mean.
Yeah,
so.
We've been talking in the class a lot about real-time web and location. The fact that DARPA, you know, the military agency looking at advanced funding, is actually looking at social media and Web 2.0 technologies is really, you know, kind of a complete shift if when I think about it, in terms of looking at real-time processing, how information gets carried from one distributed network to another, and how they could utilize that from a military perspective. All right, Rob?
Well, I think the point he just brought up about personal identifiable information is one that I hope we talk about more on this panel today, because
I'm making note of it.
one of the topics that always kind of crosses my mind. I see the insides of how all these things work. So we build platforms that companies deploy and then help them figure out how to mine them like crazy to get all this kind of personal data out of them. The somewhat scary part about it is just how much information is there. People freak out when their credit cards are stolen, you know, en masse from these companies, but they don't recognize that they're also contributing massive amounts of personal identifiable information on Facebook and other, you know, networks. And so when I look forward as far as the trends for 2010, I think there's really some interesting things that have happened, especially in the last 5 years. The first is companies, and so I'm always going to speak from the perspective of the large businesses that we work with that deploy this kind of technology, not so much from the social media side, but from like the Microsofts that are deploying this technology, and the Procter & Gamble's and Starbucks and those types of organizations. And I think the big shift that we've seen, especially in the last 18 months, has been a shift on return on investment. These organizations are laser focused now on how to start drawing the value back out. In some ways, the shine is worn off of the new glitzy technology, And they care much more about how do I start extracting the value of the dollars I've invested into these solutions. Organizations like Dell have done an amazing job at this.